Hi, Silver Rain here. I'm pretty much doing a marathon. Because I can't live here anymore. Okay? Ever since I was a kid, I went to college within a month after I turned 17. Okay? And my whole life I have striven for economic independence, control over my life. And I have worked very hard. Very hard I've worked. And that's why I'm doing another broadcast. I cannot continue to live here. I can't continue to live like this. I can't continue to know how my rights have been violated and how much I've been ignored. Okay? So I tagged every news agency I could find, and some, and some small ones that I respect, to try to be sure that I have made it very clear what has happened to me and how outrageous it is and how important it is for Americans to learn exactly what I've been through and exactly how I've been cheated and exactly how I've been targeted and exactly why I'm living the life of an economic failure right now, despite all the work I've done to have a different outcome. Okay? So I'm back on because this is the only hope I've got, is to just keep trying, keep working hard, even though I've been working hard my whole life for nothing. I have nothing to show for all my work. So because I feel like I keep getting sort of carried away and I digress, and I guess because I've been doing this so long, I figure people know certain things. So what I'm going to do in this broadcast is just go through a chronology of the disappointments and the sabotage and the things that I've been through. And I'm not even going to start with the way my family was sabotaged before I even became an adult. I'm not even going to go there. I'm just going to start with when I started working with Brunswick Corporation, Sheldon L. Epstein of Wilmette. I started working with inroads for Sheldon Epstein at Brunswick. I was hired on the telephone by Frank Carr. He'd heard about me from the nuns at Aquinas Dominican High School, where I had gone to school from November until June when I graduated. I barely got my application to Northwestern University in because my mother was under so much stress with her new babies. She just had my little brother. He wasn't even a year old yet, and it was a hard birth. And she was fighting my stepfather for the money, for the kids. And my brother, Vern, my older brother that died, he drowned in the river under very mysterious circumstances that I believe Andre and Anthony were involved with the death of my brother. I believe he was murdered. So I kind of want to go through exactly why I'm living here and what it's like. And I want to do it in a very straightforward way because I have tagged all the news agencies. So they should be watching this, and I don't want them to feel confused by all of the ways I've gone in and out of the story in my other broadcasts today that I've included them in. So I went to work for Brunswick Corporation, and my title, they let me give myself a title. I was a legal trainee. And at Brunswick Corporation, I was there as an Inroads intern. Inroads Chicago recruited me as a part of their business development for Americans, Black and brown Americans. They had a program where they were trying to get us into management tracks with Chicago corporations. because a lot of us weren't able to work in the corporations at a professional level. I was raised to become a doctor or a lawyer because my parents, my grandparents said that's the only way you can avoid being subjected to racism is if you have your own business serving your own people, because Europeans are going to not come to you. They're going to use racism to control your income. But Frank Carr came. He was the founder, a Princeton graduate, who later became a Jesuit priest. He founded Inroads, and he called me personally at home. And I was looking for a job. Walking Chicago in my platform shoes and my mini skirt with a big red afro, looking for a job in the summer. It was already summer by the time I was looking for a job, which means that everybody already had their job for the summer. And anybody that was smart had already interviewed. So I wasn't having much luck finding a job. I was going out, I was applying. I was 16 years old and I didn't get a job. And then Frank Carr called a little while before my 17th birthday, within a week. And he talked to me over the phone and he told me about Inroads. And I said, well, I'm not planning a career in business. I'm going to be a lawyer. And I was going to be a lawyer because I'd already punched out of chemistry in high school. And I punched out of math in high school. So being a doctor, I wasn't going to be able to get credentialed because I couldn't memorize a multiplication table under any, I still can't. I do not have a rote memory. It's something that God just didn't give me. I can only remember things when they are associated with other things because I can only remember concepts and ideas, not like facts, like the dates in history. Who cares when it happened? What matters is what happened, not when. So I just don't have a memory for that. So I was left with being a lawyer, and that was my intention, was to become a lawyer. So Frank Carr said, well, you know, there are corporate lawyers. And I was like, oh, really? Tell me more. So Frank Carr recruited me into Inroads Incorporated and promised me I would get a job, asked me what title I wanted for this legal trainee job. And I said, how about legal trainee? Well, he said I had the job right there on the phone, but he didn't want me to start at 16, so we waited a week until I turned 17, and then I started the job. Now, I turned 17 on July 23rd. That means I didn't have much time to work that job, but Northwestern University didn't resume their quarter system until September 21st. They had an indoctrination, period, but you didn't have to be there for that. So I was able to get enough work in to buy my first semester, my first quarter of books. And I think I was able to get the second quarter of books too. Maybe even the third quarter of books. But I also had a work study job. So I was able to buy books with that job money. But that first year in college was extremely hard for me financially. Very, very hard. Because even with my savings, I didn't have enough money to feed myself on Sundays when Northwestern University did not have the food service. And I was not able to buy warm coats or things like that because my clothes were mostly summer work wardrobe. But I went to Brunswick Corporation and worked a 37.5-hour week. The first summer that I worked, I had to commute from 95th Street and Colfax Avenue in Chicago all the way to Brunswick Corporation near the Old Orchard Mall, across the highway from the Old Orchard Mall in Skokie. Okay? It was an extremely long commute. If I took the 95 bus to the L, which is the name for the train, the subway, I would have to take that train all the way to the end of the line, all the way to Rogers Park at the end of the line. And that was a very long ride. And then I would have to transfer to the Evanston Express I think they had a train that went to Skokie that ran during rush hour, but I'm not sure what we called the Skokie train. But it would run to Skokie, and then from Skokie, I would have to get a ride. I'd have to take a bus to the mall, and then I'd have to take a corporate van. They would send a van to the bus stop at the mall. My commute took me over 2 hours each way a day. I eventually, once I got in there, I was able to find a carpool of other Black Americans that were commuting all the way to Skokie. And I was able to get a ride with them after I got to the company and made some connections. But that still took at least 2 hours, sometimes even longer if there were accidents on the road or a lot of traffic. So I would be leaving my house at 6 o'clock in the morning to start a work day at 8:30. And then when I got off work, I would be home, I suppose, by 6 or 7. And then I had a second job that I would work from 7 to 11, 10 or 11 at night. I had a second job with the city of Chicago through their youth corps program. So I had 2 jobs the summer that I turned 17. And that's the money I used to buy my books for school and the clothes I wore, because there was no money in my family, not a penny, not a cent. They were struggling and waiting for my stepfather to give them money. And he just wanted to forget. He bought a Mercedes Benz and he just wanted to forget because he was a psychopath. Okay. But he still left me money when he died. Because what's he going to do? Keep it? Take it with him? No. And he'd use me as a tax haven with trust. So every summer, 16 to 17, 17 to 18, 18 to 19, 19 to 20, 4 summers, I worked at Brunswick Corporation. I would work from the day after school ended, even if it was a Friday, I would work because I needed the money. And I would stop working just before it was time to go back to school because I needed the money. I needed every cent I could make. During that 4 summers, I asked Sheldon for a raise once in my 3rd year, and he said no. So I worked for $4 an hour when I started, and I worked for $4 an hour 4 years later when I stopped working for Brunswick. And never once did Sheldon L. Epstein give me a dime, although he knew I was supporting myself. He knew I was paying rent at the YWCA. He knew I didn't have a car. He knew I needed money, and it wouldn't have been any problem for him to authorize an increase in my salary. It would have been nothing, but Sheldon did not want to. So every summer I went to Brunswick Corporation. They started me off with a guy named Steve. And Steve had a Maserati, and he loved that Maserati. He talked about it a lot. But Steve did nothing to help train me to be a corporate lawyer in patents and trademarks. Absolutely nothing. He said, just sit in the library and get familiar with the books. Well, I don't know if you've ever seen legal books before, but they're very boring, especially the ones they use in patents. And getting somebody to teach me how to shepherdize a case, even when you know how to shepherdize a case, figuring out the right keywords and understanding the relevancy of the issues is a challenge, especially for a 17-year-old high school graduate. But I learned to do it. Over the summers that I was there, I learned to do it. But while I was at Brunswick Corporation, one of the first things I did was get rid of Steve because Steve was lazy, do nothing. He even left the company. I'm not sure if he left before the summer was over. He might have left before my first summer was even over. He might have left even before then. Well, I guess that doesn't make anything any better. But I noticed this guy named Sheldon Epstein. And it didn't take much to notice that he had a lot of ambition. He was always busy working. He was giving the secretaries a lot of work to do. Unlike John Heimovic's, he had one secretary and he didn't seem to produce too much. And he was the only other lawyer that came to work regularly. One of the senior lawyers, he hardly ever came to work. And he had actually a Black American secretary named Willa, and she did all of his work. He was responsible for creating the annual report for Brunswick. She did all of his work. She would even go in his office to lay out her big pieces of paper. I don't think I saw him even once, because he didn't come to work. He just got paid, and Willa Randall did his job for him. And then at the other end of the hall was another man that Sheldon called a wasp. And he was really good looking, like John F. Kennedy. He was really handsome. But he hardly ever came to work. Hardly ever came to work. And Sheldon really resented that. So Sheldon L. Epstein, was obviously a go-getter. So once I was in the office, long enough to get a feel for things, I said, ooh, I want to work for him because he's busy. So I made an appointment and I talked to Sheldon L. Epstein and I said, would you be my mentor? Steve's not that interested. And Sheldon agreed to be my mentor after giving me a talk in which he taught me about European nationalist racism. He said, well, I'll have to think about it because I'm not going to get paid anymore for doing this for you. They're not going to pay me any more money for doing this for you. So I'll have to think about it. And then he told me, he said, even if you become a corporate lawyer, you could never live in my neighborhood. We have real estate covenants that would prevent Black people from living where I live. So even if you become a lawyer, you're not going to have it that good. You're not going to have economic freedom. You're going to find Europeans standing against you all the time. Now, don't forget, I had just turned 17. I was really just a child. And my mother had raised me to believe I could do anything that I put my mind to, as long as I had a little bit of talent and was willing to work hard, right? Now, I knew that wasn't true because I couldn't do math and I couldn't do chemistry, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how many times I was grounded for not getting straight A's or at least, A's and B's. Every time I got a C and got grounded and punished, didn't matter how hard I studied or tried, I just did not have the talent for doing math. And chemistry relied on math. And even my physics grades weren't that good. You see, I went to high school in Canada where you get to take physics and chemistry and biology after you do general science in grade 9. I was able to study philosophy, ancient history, like a real education is what I got in the Canadian school system. And I'd been in the Canadian school system for grade 6, grade 7, grade 9, 10, 11, and a wee little bit of grade 12 before I moved back to America to get a really crappy education at the private schools, Catholic, for Black people. But I did spend a little time at Woodrow Wilson High School there in Washington, D.C., but I was so new there that I wasn't in their advanced placement classes. And I just stayed for a minute, so I was in and out. But I definitely noticed that the quality of education, even at Woodrow Wilson, which was one of the best high schools, public high schools in Washington, D.C., even the education there was inferior to the education in a regular public school in Canada. But the people in Canada that I went to school with did so much less with their education than the Americans did. So they got a super good high school education, but then they just became drunks, or, party girls, or regular employees without advanced degrees. Some of them didn't even go to college until they were like adults, and then they went into an executive management program. So in terms of ambition and drive, they got a better education in high school, but they didn't have as much drive to achieve as the Americans. So I guess, there's a trade-off there. But for me, it worked out great because I got the superior education and the American drive to do something outstanding with it. So I got the job at Brunswick. Sheldon insulted me, hurt my feelings, and shattered me with that talk. I went home in shock. I mean, I was hurt so deeply, I couldn't even understand the traumatic injury that I'd been dealt. It was as if, now Sheldon L. Epstein had ancestors who were in the Holocaust. So imagine that you're a 17-year-old kid and you're a Jew in World War II, and you're working for a German, and that German says, no matter what you do, you're always going to be treated like a Jew. You're always going to have a yellow star on you. You're never going to be equal to us. You're never going to get the opportunities we get. You're not even going to be able to pick where you live because you're a Jew and I'm not. That's the kind of talk Sheldon gave me. In my country, among my people, my ancestors. My Uncle Warren G. served in World War II. My family helped to rescue his ancestors. But he couldn't wait to tell me that his community had legal covenants, which is against American government. You're not allowed to do that. But they had covenants. He said, even if someone wants to sell their house to you, they can't, because there's a covenant on all the property. I was shattered. I mean, I wasn't trying to live in his house, and he said more things. That's just the only thing I remember, because that was how he opened the conversation with me. That was his lead, That was his lead. But I understand it much better now. You see, the job of a corporate lawyer, a patent lawyer for Brunswick Corporation, was not that involved. There really wasn't much to do. That's why the other Europeans that weren't Jewish didn't even come to work. They didn't even show up because there really wasn't that much work to do. And your secretaries did most of the labor. So, you didn't really have to come to work. If you didn't want to and nobody was going to get you for it. So spending the day at the golf course or at the club, what did it matter when there's really no work to do? Which I found pretty much to be what I found in most parts of corporate America. Most of the companies I worked for really did not have enough work to support their staff. That's why in the 1990s, when a lot of these corporations decided to divest themselves of the responsibility for employees, they found it extremely easy to carry on because there had never been that much work to do. Not that I could see anyway. If you ever saw that show Mad Men, where Don Draper, he spends years and then he comes up with one big idea and everybody else is just waiting around for him to come up with an idea, and then they draw a few pictures and bam, everybody gets $1 million. But the rest of the time they're all just hanging out at the office, having sex during lunch, making jokes, flying paper airplanes, just wasting their time. Well, that's what corporate America was really like. That's what it was really like. So I was glad that I wasn't going to be falling asleep in the law library at the patent and trademark department, legal department at Brunswick Corporation once I started working for Sheldon, because Sheldon actually gave me some work. He actually took his responsibilities seriously. I mean, he told me that he was trained at Columbia University and that Northwestern University wouldn't let him in, that he wanted to go to Northwestern. But back when he was going to college, Northwestern didn't take Jews. They had a whole unwritten policy of no Jews. And I looked back at the presidents that were in charge then, and they were German military. They actually had German military officers as the president of the university. So I could really see how Sheldon was justifying, I could really see the justification for what Shelley said about a discrimination against Jews. And it also helped me to understand why the Jews put their name on everything they could find at Northwestern University and became the presidents 3 times in a row, because they felt that they really needed to knock that wall down and get in there and dominate and make up for the fact that Sheldon couldn't get in there when he was a child going to college. But the Jews that became the president let Sheldon into the Technological Institute, first as a professor and then as a volunteer, because he was using his ability to steal and identify important information to steal and patent material being developed by the Technological Institution professors and students, and using the computer network to even find other relationships to invade. So Sheldon got his revenge on Northwestern. But during this day that he's talking to me, he's telling me that he went to Columbia. He had to go all the way to New York to Columbia. Cornell, Big Red. He had to go to Cornell to get his degrees because it accepted Jews and a lot of the other schools didn't, for whatever reason. After the World War II, intellectuals infiltrated. Men like Sheldon found it easier to get in, but I guess they had only gotten as far as Cornell. So I knew I didn't have an engineering degree, and I knew I'd never get one because of that mathematics thing. So I never really saw myself as any kind of threat to Sheldon L. Epstein until I was, in 2014 when he died, I was remembering. And as a mature person who had been through a thing or two, I was able to put him in a completely different context. And I was able to understand how horrible it must have been for him to train me to do his job, and to know that the level of expertise required for most of his day-to-day tasks could be done by a 17-year-old girl, and a black girl at that. So he taught me how to go through the files to find samples of letters of rejection to inventors, because one of the things that the patent lawyers at Brunswick did was evaluate correspondence from inventors that said they had a new product or a new game for the recreation industry or a new way to manage bowling balls and bowling pins, things like that. And Sheldon would look the letters over and decide who was going to be rejected, and then he'd give me this stack of letters, and I would use my IBM Selectric computer and my correction tape and my Times New Roman ball, and I would type out rejection letters to the inventors. My other task was to shepherdize cases for Sheldon and for John Heimovix, the 2 guys that came to work. And they would give me the keywords and tell me the legal issues that they were looking at. And then I would go through the books. You've got to look in one book to get, a reference. And then you look in another book to get the actual case. And then you look in another book. But I'd learned how to do that. So I would shepherdize the cases and give them all of the cases that had any kind of relationship. And I would give it to them in Xerox copies. I would use the Xerox machine to make copies of those cases so they could look through those cases. And then that was my job as well. Okay. But The fact of the matter is the actual real litigation that took place from Brunswick Corporation to protect themselves against any kind of infringement was extremely small, very little. In fact, I never saw them litigate a case. By my third or fourth year there, Sheldon had me doing legal research on things that were interesting to him. Like one summer, he had me do research on abatement of a nuisance because he said that there was a slough outside the corporation that was hatching mosquitoes and that he wanted to sue them about that. And this would be my fourth summer. So Sheldon Epstein sent me to Cook County Law Library in downtown Chicago from the company so that I could do the legal research required. And that was so exciting for me to be out of Brunswick Corporation and to be a part of the Chicago legal community, as a legal trainee from Brunswick, doing research, talking to the law librarian at the Cook County Law Library. It was totally cool. It wasn't until decades later that I realized that while I was out of the office, you see, when I was out of the office for a few days, and when I came back, Sheldon was gone and never came back. And after waiting for him for a while, I ended up demoted. They put me on the first floor at the lobby in the very front desk where everybody who comes in gets to see me. And I had been on the suite below the chairman of the board. I was in the executive level on the 5th floor all those other summers. And I didn't know where Sheldon was. I thought he'd had a nervous breakdown because he was acting so crazy. And he'd had an ulcer that was growing out of his face that seemed to have things in it. I thought I saw a wiggling thing in his face. So he put a Band-Aid on it. I guess I was staring at it a lot. But when I got back from the Cook County Law Library, Sheldon was gone. Now that summer I had also written a 30-page business plan. I learned how to write a business plan. I had to, get books on how to write a business plan. And I wrote a business plan for Aunt Polly's daycare. Brunswick Corporation wanted to start a licensed daycare at the bowling alleys so that mothers and fathers could do their league bowling and have childcare for their children. So I did all the business plan for that, and I gave it to Willa Randall to type, which was different. I usually type things myself, but they wanted you to turn it into, a properly formatted publication. So I was to give it to Wilma Randolph, and it disappeared from her inbox. My business plan was never found again, so I had nothing for my files to prove my work, and it just disappeared. I don't know who got credit for it, but nobody saw it. So Sheldon L. Epstein disappeared. My business plan disappeared, and I was sent on a wild goose chase to study abatement in Chicago. Well, later on, when I found out that Sheldon had submitted an EEOC complaint in his name against himself in my name, I understood that he had them thinking that the reason I was out of the office and in Chicago was not to do legal research, but was to go to the EEOC to file this complaint. And the reason that he totally disappeared when I left was because the repercussions of that complaint gave him his advantage. He got his leverage. He was able to storm off the job because by that 4th summer, he still had not gotten promoted. He was angry at me because he had been training me and they didn't even put it on his evaluations as something to credit him. And he wanted the job of that Christian, and he hated that Christian. He hated him so much because he never came to work, but he was the chairman of the department, not the chairman, but the vice president of the legal. And Sheldon wanted that job. He wanted it bad, right? He wanted it as badly as he wanted to go to Northwestern. And look at the revenge he got on them. So when he saw the opportunity, when he came up with the plan to ruin my career and future so that I could never even try to get a real estate under a racist covenant, instead of doing that, I come back to a brand new job where I'm discredited. And the reason that they put me in the lobby is because they thought I knew I had filed an EEOC, because they thought I filed the EEOC, so they were punishing me. But to me, I was just being punished, right? I'm saying, well, gee whiz, what's happening? I don't understand what's happening. What's happening? And it took me years. It took me years to put all the pieces together and finally figure it out. To figure out why Illinois Bell called me the day after I was fired to say, this is the EEOC department. You quit. You weren't fired, you quit. That's what the Black employees at EEOC at Illinois Bell told me, because they thought I had filed with the EEOC from Brunswick, and they knew that I was punished by not being able to find a job for 2 years after I graduated. I couldn't get a job anywhere, and I couldn't go to law school because Sheldon L. Epstein, my primary recommendation, completely disappeared, which means I had 4 summers working as a legal trainee in the Patent and Copyright Department of Brunswick Corporation and no recommendations. That means you messed up. That means they didn't recommend you because you didn't do a good job. So I couldn't get into law school. And I only tried the top law schools because I knew that with the way the economy was for Black Americans, nobody was going to be able to pay for me. My mother was already a lawyer and she was struggling to make a living. She was living, her practice was supported by my stepfather's settlements. That's what supported her practice until she made some multi-million-dollar personal injury victories. And that took over a decade. It takes a long time for a case to work through the system. And for you to be in a political position where you get to be the winner, well, that takes a long time too. My mother had to really develop a lot of influence. She was the president of the Cook County Bar Association. She was involved with that community. So she had the cachet, the political cachet, to actually win a case in the Chicago courts by the time she won. So I knew that if I didn't get into a top law school and then get into a top law firm, that I'd be wasting my time in law school. But without a recommendation from Sheldon L. Epstein, my 91st percentile on the LSAT meant nothing, okay? With average grades from Northwestern because of the subjective grading in the English department. How could I be writing briefs for lawyers all summer and not be able to write a research paper that can get an A? Well, the Europeans were getting the A. The students that paid tuition were getting an A. When they look at me and see a scholarship student, they see the curve. They say, oh, we can put her in the C because the C is a curve. It's as good as an F when you're trying to go to law school. You know, you don't need C's. So Northwestern European racism sabotaged my grade point average. Sheldon L. Epstein at Brunswick Corporation sabotaged my recommendation. The only thing I had going for me was my LSAT score, and it was extremely high. Not so high in the quantitative, but the analytical and the other, I was like 89 and 90%. The last time I took it, I think I was in the 99th percentile. I mean, I was up there, but it didn't matter. Didn't matter at all. Plus, I had hardly any money for the applications. Where was I going to get $50 per application when I didn't have a job because I was blacklisted because Sheldon did an EEOC on me? So right out of the gate as an adult, I was compromised by European racism at my university, and I was compromised by European racism from the Jews at Brunswick Corporation, from Sheldon L. Epstein. And when he filed that EEOC report, he also made it impossible for me to get a job right out of college. It took me 2 years to get a full-time job. Well, I was lucky. I wanted to be a computer programmer, so I asked all my girlfriends who majored in computer science. I said, listen, I'm not good at math. You think I could be a programmer? How much math do you have to know? And they said, oh, girl, you could do it. Writing code has nothing to do with mathematics. You could do it. So I went to Northwestern University Division of Continuing Education. I took algebra and trigonometry to get my math scores up, my math skills up. And by the time Zurich American Insurance Company in Chicago published an ad offering a job to literature and music majors, because they were trying to close the gap that the tech types couldn't really communicate and the business types were too chatty. So they were having a very hard time. There was a cartoon, a meme that came out around then that would say what the user wants, and they'd show a swing, a kid on the swing, and what the programmers give them. And it would be just a garbled, piece of wood and twisted wires. It wasn't a functional swing at all. And that was the meme that was out to describe this. So Zurich American decided that if they get more people with language skills and technical skills in there, people with analytical minds, that they could bridge that gap. So they brought me in as a trainee, and I was able to, what the recruiter told me is he said I had the highest score on the aptitude test, and only Greg Offel's score came close to mine. And my score was so high because I had just taken algebra and trigonometry. So my mathematical knowledge was fresh, and the mathematics on the exam was not beyond that level. So it was very easy for me. And then with my verbal skills, so they hired me, and I was like one of their number one candidates, but I finished last in the class. I was always the last one to get my programs done. But do you know why? The Europeans told me why. Just before the class ended, they said, why don't you just get the answers from Jim? That's what we do. There was a guy named Jim, a short guy with glasses and facial hair. And he had already been a programmer, but he didn't have a college degree, I think. So he was in the training program. And he would do all the problems and then send it out to all the Europeans in the class. The other 9 students in the class were getting the answers. And finally, one of the girls said, why don't you just get the answers from Jim? That's what we do. Everybody's getting the answers from Jim. You're actually doing the assignments. She was surprised that I was actually doing the assignments. But here's what happened. I learned how to program. I learned how to program really well. I learned how to program so good that I was able to take my COBOL, my PL1 training from Zurich American Insurance and get a job at Illinois Bell in COBOL. Just like that. Because the industry knew that if you could program in PL1, which is a more advanced programming language, then COBOL would be nothing but more boring for you. It would be a snap. So PL1 training made me very portable, but I also knew job control language. I was also learning something called VSAM and relational database programming. I was learning things. In fact, Zurich American Insurance Company moved from downtown Chicago, where I was actually living with my boyfriend. He had a condo at Outer Drive East, right on the lakefront, on Randolph Street on the lakefront in Chicago. And we were living there. So when Zurich American Insurance Company built a facility in Schaumburg, Illinois, 30 miles west of the city, I commuted for a while. But why was I going to live in the heart of Chicago where there's so many jobs for computer programmers and then commute all the way out to Schaumburg? Why did they have to move to Schaumburg? Why couldn't they have just stayed in the financial district of Chicago? It was wonderful there. But no, they built a facility. They moved out to Schaumburg. and I had to commute once again, just like at Brunswick Corporation. I'm commuting from the city to the suburbs. So I left after a few months after the training program was over, maybe not that long, but long enough. I left. And it was really funny because the HR woman, when I was leaving, she came downstairs and she said, you know, we are really sorry to see you go because you were on our list for management. We were going to promote you. Now, Jim Hanna, who was my boss, he must have known that they were going to promote me, because he would like us to go out drinking with him, but nobody could keep up drinking with Jim Hanna. Jim Hanna would have 5-6 drinks. He was a real alcoholic, and that's why he couldn't keep a job. But he must have known that I was going to be his replacement, because what Jim did was he invited me and a male employee to go out for drinks with him. Now, if you're an ambitious worker and your boss says, come on, come out, let's go to dinner and drinks, you're not going to say no. It's the politics of the job. So I went with them, and we sat at the bar and we drank and we drank and we drank. I think I had 5 scotch and sodas, scotch and ginger ale, scotch and something. And I was pretty drunk, but I wasn't near to being unconscious, and I wasn't near to being irresponsible, because it just so happens that I can drink a lot and not really get drunk. I can drink a bottle of vodka and walk away like nothing happened. It's just the way I am. It's just the way I'm made. So I was kind of drunk, but I had to get a ride home with this guy. And on the way home, he tried to rape me. I mean, he almost had a car accident because he's trying to put his hand up my skirt because he wants to sexually molest me and rape me. And I'm fighting him. I'm saying, I'll die before I let you touch me. We'll die in this car tonight before I let you touch me. I'll never be raped again. But I could tell that he was kind of leading to that because he was getting a little touchy and flirty at the bar. And Jim is just looking at us laughing and telling dirty jokes. Jim had one dirty joke. He said, so a guy's at the airport and he sees a hole in the wall and it says wife away from home. So he feels, pretty excited about that, wife away from home. So he sticks his cock in the hole in the wall. And he screams. And when he pulls it out, there's a button sewn on it. Wife away from home. Jim told that joke every time he got drunk. And he didn't tell it just once. It was his favorite joke to tell. So he's telling dirty jokes. He's drunk. He lives somewhere in the suburbs. I'm way out in Schaumburg. And I got to get a ride home with Terry, who's already made advances towards me, already propositioned me that night, enough for me to call my boyfriend and say, hey, I got to get a ride home with the guy who's pretty drunk and who's acting kind of sexually aggressive. So Terry ended up driving me not all the way home, but to a place where I met my boyfriend and his cousin, because they were meeting me right there so that I wouldn't get raped. And they met me right there. And it was really funny because Terry didn't know if they were going to beat him up or shoot him. So he told them, I've got a gun in the trunk of the car. And then he goes, to open up the trunk of his car. And my men they're not going to be, bitches or anything. They're standing there sort of waiting to see what Terry's going to do. And then when Terry sees, they're not going to beat you up. They're not going to shoot and kill you for trying to rape me. Then everybody just went home. Okay. But my boyfriend, who I married, and his cousin, who was a lawyer with Sidley and Austin, Harvard graduate, Harvard undergrad and Harvard Law School. His grandfather was Cornell Davis, who was the first American politician elected to the Illinois House of Representatives. He came with my boyfriend, whose father had owned Jack's Back Door, a legendary restaurant that served prime meats until the Europeans closed in on them and ruined the business district in Hyde Park. But before that, my husband's family was in the restaurant business. And everybody who was somebody came to their restaurant. Well, I'm trying to do a straight line chronology so that you can see all the places where I lost an opportunity due to European nationalist racism or Jew racism against Americans, anti-American Jews. And I'm trying to explain that to you chronologically as much as I can. But as you can see, there are so many offenses against me, so many times when things should have gone differently, that it's so hard for me to just keep going through. But after I couldn't get into law school, I became a computer programmer. And after working for Illinois Bell, what they did to me there was against the law too. I worked there for a woman named Charlotte Melzer. And Charlotte Melzer was not very smart or very attractive. She was one of those people with a big body and a little head. But she lived in Lake Forest, and she was attending Lake Forest School, where they would give uneducated people a graduate degree, an executive management degree. And Charlotte was in that program. And I had come from Northwestern. And because my boyfriend had a big inheritance, I had a couple of suits from Saks Fifth Avenue that I used as my work wardrobe. So I was extremely well dressed. And I knew everybody that ran a restaurant in Chicago. Whenever we went out for somebody's birthday, the maitre d's knew me because my boyfriend was a good tipper, and we ate out every meal. Never cooked at home. Our kitchen didn't even work. It didn't even work because we never ate at home. We ate at the restaurants. And the restaurants were similar to the food quality that his parents sold. So they were good restaurants. So everybody knew me. So Charlotte was incredibly jealous of me. Incredibly jealous of me. Oh, plus I had a 3/4 carat Tiffany's diamond ring, engagement ring on my finger. The diamond was so big that I would frequently turn it around to hide it, to reduce the level of envy in people that saw it. That's how big it was for that time. So I used to talk to Charlotte, and she would look at me like this. She couldn't understand me when I spoke. She couldn't understand me. And I didn't know if she couldn't understand me because she wasn't that smart, or if she couldn't understand me because she was so racist that she was angry the entire time I spoke, saying, why can this black person be so intelligent? How can this black person be so intelligent? How can she be so much better than me? I could almost hear her. Well, Charlotte wanted to destroy me. Inroads Corporation taught me to make hard copies of every work order I got. They said, always document your work because the Europeans are going to try to fuck you over. Always document your work. So I had a copy of every single work order I had with my estimates on it and my sign off and whether I succeeded by meeting the deadline or not. Almost all of my work orders were successful. And I had quite a few of them because, unlike the other people in the corporation, I don't know how to sit around and do nothing. I have to be productive. I have to work. That's why I got Sheldon to work for me, because I said, Steve, he's a lazy bum. He's not going to do shit. I need a job. I need to work. I can't sit around all day. How do they do it? How do they just sit? So I had a lot of work orders. So this is what Charlotte did. On my first evaluation, she said I couldn't get a promotion or a raise because I didn't seem to understand programming. That was her reason. You don't seem to understand programming. So I bought books on programming and I shared the books with her. And I told her about the chapters. And this is when she'd be looking at me like this and like this and like this. And I did that so that the next time she couldn't say that I don't understand programming. And if that was the only complaint she had against me for not giving me a promotion and a raise, then poof, it's gone. I proved to you I know programming. See these books? See me teaching you what's in these books? So the second time it came for my evaluation, what Charlotte did was she didn't count all my work orders. She left a percentage of my work orders out so that it looked like I did not meet the corporate goals. And I exceeded the goals. And the goals were like 96%. You had to get 96% of your work done right. And I exceeded the goals. But Charlotte didn't count all my work orders. So I'm going through, I'm looking at how many she's got, I'm looking at how many I've got, and she left a lot of them out. So I go to her, I say, you left a lot of my work orders out. When you put these work orders in, you'll see that I exceeded the goals and I deserve my raise and promotion that you promised me. And Charlotte said, well, I'm not going to accept those. And I said, well, I'm going to complain. I'm going to complain to your boss. And she said, oh, that position is vacant. There's no one in that position. There's no one for you to complain to. And I said, well, I want to transfer then. She said, fine, I'll transfer you. So she transferred me to Jeff Rowe, her peer, her friend. Same difference. I go to work for Jeff Rowe. I take the place of this guy who gets hired by Western Electric, which is a step up. He gets hired by Western Electric in Lisle, and I take his job, and he's functioning at the level above mine. So I'm thinking I'll get that promotion. So I talk to Jeff Rowe. I say, well, hey, the guy whose place I'm taking was higher up in the company than myself, and I'm trying to get my promotion and my raise. I haven't gotten my raise. What's it going to take? And Jeff said, all you have to do is satisfy your clients. My clients were so satisfied that the day they fired me, my client called me and said, tell me it's not true. We're finally getting our work done. We're finally getting our agenda met. The guy before you was so incompetent. We are so happy to have you. And he told me that before. He said, you got it done already? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, it used to take us so long to get anything like this done. So he starts really advancing his plans for getting his work done because I'm working for him. So Jeff Rowe decides he's not going to give me the promotion. So I'm looking for another job, right? And I see that they hand out a flyer that says AT&T is hiring for Unix system developers. They're going to develop the Unix operating system, and they're looking for people out of the Illinois Bell technical departments. So I made an appointment, and I took time off work, and I went to the interview with AT&T. And before I left the office, the guy I interviewed with, the European I interviewed with for AT&T, called Illinois Bell. So when I got to work the next day, Jeff says, oh, so you're looking for another job, huh? Or he mentioned that to me as they're firing me. And I said to him, well, Jeff, you promised me a promotion if I met certain criteria. And then you didn't promote me. You didn't give me my promotion or my raise like you promised. And Jeff said, are you calling me a liar? Now, Jeff was a little guy with a big mustache who walked on the balls of his toes to try to push himself higher when he walked. And he had a crush on an obese Jewish girl who lived with her parents. And he expressed to me his anger that when she was saying, do you think I should move out and move away from my parents? And I said, well, yeah, it's a great way to live, because I'd been living on my own. But they didn't know I was living with a man, because back in those days, that would have been a sign of low morality. It was called shacking up. And you were either married or you weren't. You didn't live with your boyfriend in the 1970s, in early 1980s. And I started living with my boyfriend in the 1970s, in 1977. And we didn't get married until 81. In fact, we got married while I was at Illinois Bell, and they were all really angry that I didn't invite them to the wedding. Charlotte was angry. So I must have still been working for her then. Yeah, November, because I lost that job in January. So in November, I got married in Las Vegas. But she didn't know I eloped to Las Vegas. I didn't have a wedding. I didn't have any friends to invite to a wedding. I didn't have any money to have a wedding. And my ex-husband didn't have any friends either. Who are we going to have a wedding for? And he was in medical school. We didn't have money for weddings. But he had an ultimatum in front of his face that said, oh, you know what? I've been living with you for 3 years. That means you know if you want me to be your wife or not. And I can't be hiding and living in disgrace and shacked up. My cousins aren't even allowed to come visit me because my grandmother does not approve of this living situation. So if you're not going to marry me, I'm moving out. And that's what I did. I moved out. And once I moved out, he just felt like he had to marry me. It costed me a lot of money. I bought carpeting and blinds. I paid up my rent. And I had to give that apartment up after not even a full year. I had to leave my lease early, get married. So it was an expensive venture for me because I moved and decorated a new place in an apartment building across the street. But, you know, he stalked me and we ended up getting married. But we eloped over Thanksgiving in Las Vegas, where we spent a lot of our Christmases with Walter Lear Gordon, one of the lawyers for Billie Day Holiday when she was in California, up on charges. He's a criminal lawyer, very prominent. And Clara Gordon, his beautiful wife, who was my husband's aunt. And we used to spend Las Vegas with them over the Christmas holidays, from the day after Christmas until the day New Year's, till the day before New Year's. We would be with them in Las Vegas at the Desert Inn Hotel, which doesn't exist now, which is too bad because it was a beautiful hotel, the Desert Inn. So we got married and honeymooned at the Desert Inn. We got married at a wedding chapel right outside of Circus Casino before it became whatever it is now. It's something weird now. And then we flew back in and went back to work. And I come back to work married and people are mad at me. You didn't invite us to the wedding? You didn't have a wedding? I say, hey, I eloped. So when AT&T called Illinois Bell, they broke the law, didn't they? And it was okay for them to take an incompetent European man and promote him into Western Electric, but they couldn't give me a shot on the Unix team for AT&T. You see, that's European nationalist racism and sexism too. That I was a computer programming exceeding the expectations at my position, looking for another job because I'm being discriminated against, I'm being lied to. People are destroying my work orders to create lies to hold me back. And when I try to get out, the Europeans gang up to make sure I don't have a job at all. Well, ironically enough, a second level who couldn't hear my complaint when Charlotte cheated me had gotten a position for that job. And so he wanted to be a part of the firing. Well, Jeff says that you've called him a liar. You know, so now I'm playing games, right? Well, I never called Jeff a liar. I just said that it would be hard to trust him since he broke his word to me. So are you saying that you're not going to do your job anymore? That you're not going to do your work? I said, no, I'm not saying that I'm not going to do my work. I'm saying that I don't trust Jeff when he says he's going to give me a raise and promotion because he broke his promise twice now. So you're calling him a liar, right? No, I'm not calling him a liar. Because if you're calling him a liar, that's insubordination. Okay? And then he's like, well, we're going to have to let you go. Okay? So I say, Thanks, because I'm not a quitter. Well, you're going to lose all your retirement benefits, you know. Yeah, I know. You're going to lose your health insurance, too. They wanted me to cry and beg to keep my job. And I know that because I'd heard a rumor around the office that they were going to fire another woman who had gotten a promotion, but she cried and begged. And in time, she got promoted to the second level of management. So if you were crying and begging, if you were willing to humiliate yourself and make your bosses feel more important in that utilities job where nobody really had much to do, then you could get ahead. You could get a promotion. But if you were going to say, hey, you know what? I earned this promotion. They don't want to hear. They don't want to see you because a utility is designed to move very slowly because there just is not that much work. Once you've written the programs, once you've installed the hardware, there's really nothing for you to do unless you have to make a repair. So if you're the kind of person who's ambitious and you actually want to earn your way, you're not going to be happy in a utility company. And I had kind of, once I was in it and realized it, I started remembering everything I had learned during my years in inroads about how utilities employees are generally unmotivated, but because utilities pay plus such high salaries, many people become employees and then they can't get out of the utility because they're wearing golden handcuffs, was the insider term we used for it. You got those golden handcuffs where they're paying you so much money that you can't get a job anywhere else because nobody else will pay you to do nothing except where you are at one of the Illinois Bells. But they divested themselves of all of those lazy people when Illinois Bell, AT&T, went through the divestiture through the antitrust. The last good thing that the antitrust department, a privately owned agency, ever did in America, and it was only designed to divest the Bell Corporation of all the employees by breaking up their monopoly on the telephone industry. Just so T-Mobile, Verizon, what are the name of the other? There are only 3 telecom companies and they haven't done any innovation, but their prices keep going up and up. They're just the same monopoly. But AT&T was able to collect so much data on people. So they fired me. And I went on vacation to Hawaii. And I had the time of my life. I had such a good time there in Hawaii. And that was before Hawaii was developed. That was before they developed Oahu. So I stayed at a beautiful old-style hotel called the Prince Kuhio Hotel. And it wasn't like one of those big, shiny chain hotels. It was a hotel with beautiful rattan furniture and views of a yoga, views of a park. And it was a pleasant place to walk, and you could hear birds sing. It wasn't really developed much at all. And not far from there was a little restaurant where they served very fresh sushi, where I had sushi for the very first time, and it was so fresh, so delicious, so tender, so amazingly good, and good for you too. And I met a girl on vacation there by herself, just like me, from Singapore. And she was trying to get me to go out with her to the clubs at night. And I was trying to say to her, oh, no, I don't do any clubbing. That's too dangerous. I was going on the tours with the families and the kids. And the little girls would be looking at me saying, are you by yourself? They'd be asking their mother, because it was quite a wonder for them to see me, traveling by myself. And the Hawaiians kept thinking I was a Hawaiian because of my features. So they would be, and I'd be like, but I'm not Hawaiian. They're like, oh, wow. And then they say something like, everybody's Hawaiian, wiki. Was it like this? Everybody's Hawaiian, right? They thought I was Hawaiian. In fact, the Japanese tourists thought I was Hawaiian too. And I had a beautiful bathing suit from Yves Saint Laurent. It was black with a tank top, but it had mesh cut in the sides and in here. So there were peekaboo mesh, but it was covering everything. And I had my hair cut in a small, it was small and curly and dark. It wasn't dyed. And 2 groups of Japanese tourists just wanted to take my picture, me in my bathing suit, because they thought I was so beautiful and they thought I was Hawaiian. And I was telling them, I'm not Hawaiian. And he was like, I don't care. A man and his wife, and then another one. I don't know if they were all together, but somebody else took pictures of me too during my vacation in Hawaii, all by myself, because my husband was so busy in medical school. He couldn't go. So I went by myself. And shortly after that, I got another job. I took another job. I don't remember who I worked for next. Oh, I do now. I became a consultant. That's when I became a consultant. When I left Illinois Bell, I started my life as a consultant because I had COBOL, PL1, JCL, and some VSAM on my skills inventory. And consulting firms were just coming up because the MBA schools were producing men that could not do computer programming, but they wanted to have stables of computer programmers. And then because they were usually related to the executives, because they're all the Europeans, they just sort of installed this career called consultant that Moynihan wiped out with his laws against independent contractors. And I started having to write my own contracts to fulfill this 20 rules in the law that said, unless you fulfill these 20 rules, you have to be an employee. So a lot of people had to become employees of the consulting firms, but I was able to remain an independent and start my own sole proprietorship, Crystal Data Systems, LLC. And for a while, I got good contracts with Northern Trust, Chicago Title and Trust. But eventually, they started giving me the jobs that were not going to advance my technical skills with Amico Corporation. They wanted me to do a lot of documenting of systems that were already written and a lot of reverse engineered documentation instead of moving forward. Because by then I knew for a fact that I wanted to get involved on the leading edge. I was already doing I was a systems analyst. I was trained in system analysis too, so I was able to do the specs. And I was already doing the specs for a computer that could understand language, where you could talk to the computer and it could talk back. I was already breaking down what kind of linguistic systems you'd have to program in order to achieve this. Because I wanted to be a video games designer. I wanted my company to move into video games design. In the 1990s, my company was still functioning because your company never dies. So when I started to do the debugging to find the Apple rootkit in 2009, I did it as a part of my company. So that's when my company went from computer systems programming, then it went to home installation and repair, and then it went to cyber security, documentation, and research. And I still do that. But that cat is so far out of the bag that people don't even listen to me when I say, if you don't protect cyberspace, you don't have a future. Because they have a whole separate economy that they have developed in cyberspace, a whole separate economy that doesn't include you unless you're a European or somebody from another nation who got your own education outside of this system. So my company, we did so much research, we being me, to find that Apple rootkit. The Dino Da Violi, who owns Trail of Bits, a professional with a PhD in computer science, he called me to have a conversation with me to find out what I had researched, not only about the Apple rootkit, but about what they were doing to bust into and compromise Bluetooth. What they were doing to make Bluetooth more than a connection between you and your machine, to make Bluetooth an open port into your confidential data. And so Dino wanted to know some about that. But do you think that Dino gave me any kind of credit so that my company could get a reputation? No, he didn't do that. Do you think that Apple gave me any credit? I asked Apple, I said, listen, I'm the one who did that research. Please acknowledge my company. You know what they did instead? They sent their henchmen out to the Apple client listserv to make sure that people thought I was crazy. If you searched for my name, you would get what they had written in the Apple listserv. If you did an internet search for my name, this is before Google became the monopoly. If you did an internet search for my name, the Apple client listserv would come up with all of these so-called professionals saying that I was insane, saying that I was crazy. And because Hazel Carby had already said it, and it was already my reputation by 2009, it was so painful for me. And it gave me no credibility at all, and it didn't advance my company. So every time, all the 10 times that Apple released a security release built on my research, I got to watch others from European companies get mentioned in the security release as being a part of the research team. And the things I did would just be a sentence with no credit for me at all. So there was another opportunity that I had for success in my chosen line of work that was sabotaged by the Europeans and their corporations and the way they want their corporations to only be European, especially at the higher levels, and how they don't want a little American, real American woman's company to get a piece of the pie. They don't want me to be able to develop computer games like I wanted to. They don't want my company to get a reputation for cybersecurity. They want to do something exactly opposite, just like Sheldon did. Sheldon made sure I couldn't go to law school because I had no recommendations. Well, isn't that exactly what Apple did decades later in 2009? In 1977, Sheldon sabotaged my career to become a corporate lawyer. And with my experience, I would have been the vice president of the corporation if all things were fair in no time, because I had already been trained as a lawyer. And if there were no politics, just achievement, knowledge, hard work, ability, I would have gotten a job as a corporate lawyer. It didn't have to be in patent law. I could be the boss of the patent lawyers like the Christians were. Because that was another reason Sheldon resented the Christian that ran the department so much, because he wasn't even a patent lawyer. He wasn't even an engineer, but he was the boss of Sheldon. See, so I could have come up like that. So Sheldon didn't want me to ever enjoy success that he knew. But he learned how to be a predator. He learned that there was a value in the ideas of young people, and that you could learn a lot from a young person's written work. So as soon as he could, he took himself to Northwestern University. And as soon as he had some cronies that would let him in, he started stealing work from Northwestern University students from the Technological Institute and patenting them. But he left me dead on the side of the road. And then Apple, didn't they do the same thing? Could you imagine the prestige my company, Crystal Data Systems LLC, would have gotten if we had Apple acknowledging our research in cybersecurity? Even if all I wanted to do was be a cybersecurity publisher, I would have had credentials for that. So denying me of credentials has been the way that the Europeans and the Jews have kept me out of the money. So then, after I leave corporate America, my husband's about to become a doctor. So I'm getting the writing on the wall that as long as there's a big wall of Europeans I'm not going to be able to advance in computers the way I want to any more than I was able to advance in law. So I'm thinking I'm going to go to academia. I'm going to be a professor. It's what I always wanted to do. This computer science was just a lucky streak because I needed a job. But I'm married to a doctor, and our agreement was, you go to school, then I go to school. That was the deal we had made. Was you go to school and I work, then I'll go to school and you work. But I didn't know that graduate studies would never end. I didn't know that Yale was going to sabotage me. I didn't know that the University of Massachusetts was never going to let me out. I didn't know the future. I didn't know I had enemies. I didn't know what my enemies were about. And that's why my story is so important. Because they hit me in the head. They blindsided me because I had no idea what European nationalist racism was all about and how serious they were about fulfilling their agenda of controlling all the corporations, all the land, all the waters, all the freedom, all the homes, all of the wealth of America. They want it all. They want it all. And this is how they got it. This is how they got my share, the share that I earned for myself. This is how they got it. They got it by stealing, by tricking, by lying, by knocking me out, by not acknowledging me. And it was one European after another, one Jew after another. And they didn't have a plan or an organized conspiracy. They had a mutual understanding that they spread through their culture. You see, I don't have any place where I can talk to make secret plans against my enemies. But Europeans have hundreds of places where they can talk in privacy. They had the Lions Club, they had the Rotaries Club, and those are international organizations. They had the Nazis that still had family in Germany. They had the Jews who were having families in Israel. They had a whole network connection of places where they can talk in private about what they're going to do to people like me, to take my land, to take my stuff, to take the promise of my life, to ruin my potential, and to make me end up like a Jew in a Holocaust, to make me end up living in a concentration camp filled with Nazi SS guards that get a kick out of taking a bite out of my flesh, literally. And you're not going to know because somehow they have the power to keep me from being publicized. They have the power to control anybody with a talk show, anybody with an interview, anybody with an audience. They can control all of them. So I put tags on this. I put tags on this to every news agency I can think of. And you know they're going to watch it. They're always looking for stories. Do you think they're going to ignore me? Do you think that NPR is going to tell my story about how European nationalist racism has deprived me of an economic life and a family and friends? You know they're not. They're just going to wait until I die. Attrition is a part of their weaponry. They put me here in a place where they figure somebody's going to murder me, and I got people trying to break into my room all the damn time. I have to stay up all night just to guard my door. Is this what I earned? No, it's not what I earned at all. Now, if I'd gotten strung out on cocaine and made a mess of my life and ended up here, I'd only blame myself, but I didn't do that. I worked hard. I worked hard and I got nothing but punishment for it. The more I achieved, the more punishment I got, because the Europeans and the Jews do not want a person like me to succeed unless I'm down with their agenda for taking over the world, for owning all the water, for owning all the land, for building semiconductor factories, electric car fill-up machines all across my lands, giving themselves sovereign rights all across their land, fulfilling their ancient Magna Carta for manifest destiny. And it still goes on because they're thinking in terms of millennia. Okay? They made a millennial plan to take over America. And I'm just a casualty in their war. But if we don't even know that we have enemies and how serious they are and the things that they've done to create casualties, how can we ever have a hope of defending them? And now they want to get robots that will shoot you without even caring, even more callous than Sheldon L. Epstein, Charlotte Meltzer, Jeff Rowe, Bill Mabius, Hazel Carby, Henry Louis Gates, Catherine Portuguese, Maria Tomashko, Elizabeth Petroff, and Joe Scarrett. Even worse than these people who deliberately denied me an opportunity to have an economic success in my life, although I earned it. So after I got to Yale, and that professor who had been in the University Hearings and Appeals Board, the Black lesbian music professor, was her name Lenore? I don't know what her name was. I think her name was Wilkinson. Well, anyway, she lived in Harbor Point, which was a building that they built while I was living at Outer Drive East. And she actually got an apartment with her girlfriend at Harbor Point. And I would see her from time to time in the Harbor Point convenience store. There was a grocery store in Harbor Point as well as in Outer Drive East, where we used to shop sometimes. And I saw her there. So when I decided that I was going to go for my graduate school degree, I went to her. And I went to her apartment. She saw me, made an appointment with her. I went to her apartment and I said, hey, listen, would you write me a recommendation for graduate school? I want to study African American literature. And she said, well, I don't see any value in that. If you want to study literature, shouldn't you just study English literature? You're not going to get a job. There is not enough African American literature for you to make a career. That's what she said to me, with her baby grand piano and her swerving waterfront window from Harbor Point condominium. And she said no, she would not write me a recommendation to graduate school. So then I went to Cyrus Coulter. Now, Cyrus Coulter was a Black American. I used to see him at the American Bar Association dinners that I would go to as my mother's guest when we're all looking for husbands. So we want to, we're a bunch of foxes going to the professional association meetings with my mom. And Cyrus Coulter had been my professor at Northwestern University in the Black literature program. So he taught Black literature. And he also worked for the ICC, which was some kind of federal agency, some kind of state agency in Illinois that had to do with commerce, Illinois Commerce Commission. So Cyrus was totally sold out, but we didn't know. And anyway, they did a housing development on the near south side of Chicago called Dearborn Park. And he got a place there. And I hunted him down. And I said, hey, Professor Coulter, I want to go to graduate school. Would you write me a recommendation? He said, I barely remember you. You graduated 15 years ago. I said, yes, I know, but if you saw me, you'll recognize me. I see you all the time at legal association dinners and affairs. Yeah, well, I don't even know you. I don't want to be bothered. I said, listen, you're right there in Dearborn Park. I'll stand outside your window. Look at me and you'll recognize me. Would you write me a recommendation? He said, oh, that sounds ridiculous. No, I won't write you a recommendation. So Cyrus Coulter also said he would not write me a recommendation. But I was lucky. I was lucky because Leon Forrest, who was the chairman of the African American Studies Department at Northwestern, he actually invited me to the university, introduced me to a graduate doctoral student, introduced me to the chairman of the Department of Literature there at Northwestern. And he not only wrote me a recommendation, but he made phone calls on my behalf. So even though I didn't have many recommendations, I had the full support of Professor Leon Forrest, Mr. Leon Forrest, an outstanding Chicago novelist. So that's how I got into Yale. That's how I got the recommendations. My scores were super high. And because my college grades were not that good, but the fact that I took a literature degree and turned it into a computer programming and systems analysis company was a distinguished enough accomplishment for me to get over the GPA and prove what my potential, that the grades did not reflect my potential and my intelligence and my ability to succeed. So I got into Yale University, and the proposal I wrote to get in was, I'm seeing shows on television, I'm hearing music on the radio that is against the morals of my community. Middle class Black people do not share the values of the criminal class. That's not the language I used then. I wasn't as blunt and insulting as I am now that I'm actually living with criminals that are Black. So it was more about, my work is to undermine the stereotypes that immigrants are projecting on real Americans, and to represent my culture more accurately. Because back then, in the 1980s, they were just starting to fudge the line so that you couldn't remember the days when Black American women in particular were seen as the moral conscience of the country. You can read it in some certain history books, certain books of analysis that came out before then, was that a lot of people worried about what the Black American women would say, because we had that lingering archetype of Black women being the ultimate mother, because of so many Europeans that depended on Black women to raise the children and depended on Black men to teach their sons, because a lot of them were doing what they do now. They were having fun. They were drinking and having sex and looking for other people to do their work and not accepting personal responsibility. You know, like Gone with the Wind. If you see Gone with the Wind and you see how Clark Gable, his relationship that he had, oh my goodness, I can't remember the name of the actress. But if you see a lot of those movies, Shirley Temple tap dancing with Bill Bojangles. If you look at these old movies, you will see the reverence that the European had for the Black servants that raised them. And if you study the literature, you can even find in some British literature and other things actual stories about how the European men that were colonizing America didn't spend that much time here with their wives. Their wives were frequently younger than them. A lot of times it was a cousin. And these child brides really became a part of the Black community. The Black women protected and cared for them, cooked for them, even breastfed their babies. They didn't even want to breastfeed their own children. So there were people, Black women, who actually that's all they did. So it's so funny when I see so many Black women with great big breasts. I think part of the reason why is because there was a lot of economic success in wet nursing European children. you could make a profit on that. You could make some money. Okay? Now, it didn't have to be money. It just means you get better food. You get access to more assets because, and then when the kid grows up, it's going to be attached to you, right? And that's why it was important to keep the flood of immigrants coming, because as the Europeans learned the value of American people and learned the love and compassion and caring and maternal and paternal protection in my community, they wanted more of that. So they bring a new bunch of immigrants in. Right? They even took the Statue of Liberty down so that people won't be reminded how many immigrants came here poor and starving and dispossessed in their own lands. You might not even remember that the reason why the Revolutionary War took place was because Europeans didn't want this same hierarchy system. They didn't want it. But it turns out that they didn't want it just for themselves. They didn't mind duplicating it here. Isn't that about what we're seeing? They didn't want to be subjected to the hierarchy. They wanted to create a new royal hierarchy here. But before they got very advanced, individual Europeans were falling in love with my community. And that's why the World War II refugee, first generation after the refugees, made sure to create rap music and make that the only music there was. The women of Spelman College, the most prestigious HBCU for women in the country, did many formal protests saying, stop the rap music. It's against our community values. But by then, the enemy owned the airwaves. They owned NPR, public radio. They owned PBS, public broadcasting. They owned every production company. They owned Hollywood. They owned the ability to create a public image that would become a reality. So nobody paid attention to the women of Spelman College. They didn't say, hey, you want to know what? Black Americans don't like that. Black Americans have worked very hard to achieve success. And they've done it with a moral sensibility, with morals. Do you know how many people in my family alone founded churches? Even the European Martin Edwards, a Civil War veteran, was such an important founder of the Mill Spring Baptist Church in Mill Spring, North Carolina, that his gravestone is the first one if they haven't ripped it up. But when I went to see it and take pictures of it, I almost missed it because it's the first gravestone outside the church. Martin Edwards, my European ancestor, started a church. But on the American side of my family, Mount Scipio Baptist Church in Lima, Oklahoma, was founded by my great-grandfather. My grandmother Louise was a deaconess in that church all of her life. And I have good friends, one in Georgia, and her family started a church for their community. I mean, everywhere you had agricultural communities, they started a church, and they had Sunday school, and they taught values. They taught the values of Christianity, the values of the golden rule, the values that help preserve peace and love in a community and in a family. And if you weren't acting right, they would shame you, publicly shame you. And people cared about being shamed back then. You didn't want to be shamed because you had self-esteem, because you had dignity. But our enemies came and robbed us of all of that. Said, oh no, 50 Cent, we're going to give him a house in Westport. Not you, Silver Rain, Runningcloud, Yale graduate. We're going to give 50 Cent the money. We're going to give Snoop Doggy the money. We're going to give Drake the money. But not you, because you have integrity and decency and you're not going to tear people's morals down. You're going to build them up. And you love God. We're not going to have that. That's what these immigrants decided. And they had the power to do it, and they had the training. Because from the 1100s, when the term blood libel was created, they were practicing the art of controlling the public reputation of a people and controlling public broadcasting and making sure that your reputation had power to decide your future, no matter what you did. So I went to Yale, and it took me 3 years to get a degree that's supposed to take 2 years. But there are hardly any master's degrees that take 2 years to get. But because the Europeans decided that real American literature had to go on trial, even the American Studies Department was on probation. But they at least had a doctorate program. African American Studies stopped at the master's degree program. It stopped before you could get the full credentials to get a real job. It stopped. So your only hope would be to come in with the master's degree and then transfer over to another department. So that's what I tried to do. I tried to transfer over to comparative literature. And I had made contacts in comparative literature. I'd made contacts with Benjamin Harshav, a professor from Tel Aviv, who got a job as a Yale professor, just like Christina Hortzman Hernandez. Right off the boat, they walk into Yale University professorships. They walk into big, beautiful Connecticut houses. But not me, the real American. I get nothing but grief. I get nothing but grief and turned out. So I was accepted into comparative literature according to Claudia, a graduate student who was at the meetings. And then Vera Kuczynski, the German Polish woman, who was actually the dean of undergraduates in the African American Studies Department, she said that she didn't want me in the program. She spoke up against me. And the girl who told me, I think her name was Claudia, I'm not sure, it starts with the C. She was so outraged that she found Tonya Anderson to find me to tell me, because she thought I should know what they did to me. And Tonya Anderson, who was in the American Studies doctoral program, she found me and she introduced me to this girl. And this girl told me what they had done, that they had made the decision to accept me, and Vera Kuczynski objected to it. And that's why I didn't get into the graduate program at Yale, because they had decided that they were going to get rid of me, because my politics are not European nationalism. And by that, it was extremely clear that I was not going to be a lapdog to the Europeans. I was not going to be doing the kind of scholarship that they wanted. I was not going to be making Europeans the heroes of my stories about Black people. And that's what it would have taken to succeed. So they didn't read my thesis. They refused to read my thesis. They refused to work with me at all. So it took me one whole extra year. It took me 3 years to get my degree because they wouldn't read my work. I had to submit my thesis around them. I had to write it by myself with the help of my psychiatrist. His wife read my document and gave me feedback and the confidence I needed to push on. And then I had to file my thesis myself. And they had to follow me because I'd already been official. Because they were not going to let me out. They were going to ignore me to death. Ignore me to death. So when I went to Hazel to ask her for a recommendation, she said with her British accent, "Can you move?" So I should move, but she, a foreigner, should live in Guilford in a big house. Her son, the child of a foreigner and a Jew, immigrant, should have the big house and the big job, but me and my 2 American children, we should move. She said to me, "Can you move?" Which says you don't have a place here, Silver Rain Runningcloud. There's no place for you here. This is European country. And you've already made it clear that you're an American, politically in and out. You've made it clear that you're going to elevate the culture we're trying to wipe out. You're going to elevate Leon Forrest. You're going to elevate Richard Wright. You're going to elevate Ralph Ellison. And we want them to disappear. We want things to stop at the Harlem Renaissance. We want it to make it look like your culture got frozen a century ago. We want it to look like the best you can do is talk over some beats. You can't even compose a song. You can't even write lyrics. You can only talk over a beat. And your vocabulary can't be too strong. And your topic matter can't be too admirable. Because that's the reputation. That's the mark. That's the brand that we're going to stamp on you real Black Americans. And we're not going to let you get in our way with Yale credentials and your ambition and drive. We're going to squash you. And that's what they did. They squashed me, and Henry Louis Gates helped. Henry Louis Gates, who studied at Cambridge University, so he could get the rules, so he could be on the inside. But I remember seeing Henry Louis Gates in some kind of a documentary on PBS with his family and his European wife, and he actually said things that sounded so anti-Black. Things, that Black people who don't like Black people tend to say. And I couldn't believe my ears, but I felt like, well, not like nobody knew. But Henry Louis Gates went out of his way to destroy my career while knowing I was qualified, because he stole my Ford Foundation fellowship application, book outline, and bibliography. And he gave it to Brent Edwards. And Brent Edwards recalled and stole the microfiche newspapers from the 1930s that I had from the Illinois Repository Library that got closed down after I published my book about the plagiarism, so they could erase the tracks. So Henry Louis Gates recognized that I was the one that belonged at Harvard, but he gave Brent Hayes Edwards all of the opportunity. And Brent Hayes Edwards has spent his career not promoting the things that I wrote about in my book, because they weren't his ideas. They were never his ideas. He only published them. He didn't know them. He didn't study for the 15 years before he got to graduate school to gather the information. Because, see, when you get your doctorate, you're supposed to present original ideas. You're supposed to master the field, to see what everybody else has ever done, and then push knowledge forward with your own original scholarship. Well, it took me a long time to come up with my plans. It took me a long time to read enough to master my field. And I had mastered it enough by the time I got to Yale to actually be able to pull together my agenda within the 3 years that I was there. But they kept me there for 3 years. Some people left. Some Americans who entered the program with the same kind of ambitions and visions that I had left. Some went to better careers like law. Some went to better graduate schools like Emory or somewhere else. But when they saw that Vera and Hazel were both European foreigners, that were not there to progress anything, for one, you're going to resent it. When you come into an American academic department and you find foreigners, and it's Black literature, and you got foreigners, a Brit and a Polish, and they're the ones in charge, you don't even know how to start a conversation with them, because not only do they not know general American culture, but do you think they know Black American culture? No, not at all. Not at all. And when Vera saw that I wasn't going to let her just pump me for data, that's when she really turned against me. After I replaced her on my committee, I saw her in the hallway, and she said that she didn't remember my name. She acted like she didn't remember my name because she was so immature. Well, Vera became very famous in 1995, I believe, when she made the cover story of the Rolling Stone magazine. A Yale student killed himself because he got turned out as a homosexual by his roommate. But his roommate was having an affair with a much, much older professor. And he was going to marry that professor. And that professor was Vera. You see, Sarah Sulary was a professor at Yale University who married a Goodyear heir. I know because Vera told me. Vera was so jealous of Sarah Sulary because Sarah Sulary came to Yale and snagged herself a rich husband, a rich old man, much older than her. So when Vera got the chance to grab a young heir of American wealth, she took it. Okay? But the young man, well, consider a young man. He wasn't very attractive. And he's a freshman dating a professor twice his age, who he's going to marry. And Vera is like 6 feet tall, about 200 pounds, with a shape that's just like a Polish sausage, was her shape. And she has a baritone voice. When I first talked to her on the phone, I thought she was a man. So Vera might be a hermaphrodite. It's hard to know. But Vera was very manly. Okay? And this man that she supposedly married, who made the Rolling Stone magazine, he was short. And it made the Rolling Stone because the boy's parents were extremely upset about the entire situation. They were upset that their son had been seduced, and the boy's brother was a homosexual out already. So the family was losing both of their sons to homosexuality at Yale University. Both sons, that means no grandchildren, because both sons, the seeds are gone. They're going to be spent going up somebody's butt. And the boy who was seduced by Vera's husband killed himself because he didn't want to be a homosexual. He preferred to be dead than a homosexual, and he was in love with the homosexual that turned him out and dumped him because he was in a love triangle with Vera. And it was so scandalous it made the Rolling Stone. So Vera continued to serve at Yale for a while. I think they put her on some sexual misconduct committee or something like that. I think Robert Steptoe was also into looking for sexual indiscretions between professors and students. But Vera did something, and then she went to Vanderbilt University. Now, Vanderbilt is the alumni organization of Tina Ainley, the Arizona Superior Court judge that did not throw the charges out when the Arizona State Troopers kidnapped me, and she did not prosecute the Arizona State Troopers for kidnapping me and throwing me in jail. With no charges, I'd done nothing wrong. They had no reason to even pull me over, and they did. And it was all documented on Twitter. You know, I thought everybody would care. I thought, wow, look, I've got all these cops actually, live doing this to me. I'm going to be out of this horrible situation that I've been in. I'm going to be free. I'm going to be able to sue for my inheritances. I'm going to be free. But everybody totally ignored what the Arizona State Troopers did to me. They totally ignored what Vanderbilt Law School alumni, Superior Court judge in Arizona, Tina Ainley, did to me. Because Vanderbilt is the place where Vera Kinskinsky is welcome. Vera, K-U-T, Sinsky. Kutzinski. Vera Kutzinski. When she found that I wasn't going to let her spend her summer picking my brains for her book on sugar after I gave her the idea about sugar, then she just wanted to destroy me. You see? And then she ends up on the cover of the Rolling Stone. And then she ends up at Vanderbilt, where they love European nationalist racists that are going to steal Southern black land. So that's why Yale didn't work out for me. I was sabotaged by the European nationalist racism agenda to disempower real Americans that protect and promote real American culture and values. So then I go to UMass, and they won't even read my work. When I go to UMass, they're not expecting me to go there. Bill maybe has told me he was expecting me to go to Brown because he just knew that with my credentials, I would get in to Brown at the very least. If I didn't get into Harvard and I didn't get into Yale, I'd definitely get into Brown. UMass was my safety school, and they didn't think I'd need a safety school because they didn't know I was blacklisted. They didn't know I was plagiarized. They didn't know I had spoken out to the administration about being plagiarized. And do you know that Dean Hirschman said there's nothing we can do about it, and he practically laughed in my face? He was snickering. He thought it was funny that I'd been plagiarized. He thought it was hilarious. And that's before I even knew that Henry Louis Gates was plagiarizing me too. I didn't find that out until I had been in graduate school at the University of Massachusetts, and Brent published his book, which was my outline. After he stole the research materials. He stole the research material, kept it for 6 years. And then he puts it back. So they say, oh, we finally got this back. We can send you the copy you bought. And they send me the copy of microfiche that I bought. And then within months of that, Brent publishes his book. So I know Brent stole the research material. He kept it until his book was going to be published, to be sure that I couldn't get my work done before he could get my work done, to be sure that he could fulfill my agenda, the work that I had submitted to the Ford Foundation, the work that Henry Louis Gates gave to him, that Hazel Carby gave to Henry. Well, Brent did his part by stealing the research material to make sure that his book got out before any of my research got out. But my research was never going to get out because I was at the University of Massachusetts, where Bill Mobius and Maria Tomashko and Elizabeth Petrov tried to get me to change my mind, told me their students were going to be such a disappointment for me coming from Yale and Northwestern that I probably never saw such unmotivated, stupid students in my life. They actually threw the students in front of the bus to try to get me not to come there. But I had no place else to go. So what they did instead was they refused to support my work. They wouldn't read my work. They wouldn't meet with me. And you cannot write a dissertation without a functioning dissertation committee. And you had to have 5 people on your committee. Well, I worked my way through by myself as best as I can because I had my own agenda for learning, and I mastered 8 categories. You had to write 8 30-page papers, or was it 5? It was either 5 or 8 30-page papers, and I spent like a whole year researching and getting that ready. And then you get a set amount of time to do while you're writing. Okay, so it's like a test. So you have to do all the research, you have to prepare everything, and then you spend a certain amount of time in a closed room under supervision, writing your answers. Well, Elizabeth Petrov said she had never seen a test done as well as mine. She said it was distinguished work. but she refused to continue to direct my dissertation. She refused to read any of the chapters that I was trying to write for my dissertation. She refused to tell me what she wanted in my dissertation. And when I made a meeting to talk to her about my dissertation, she said, "How do you think Frederick Douglass learned to read?" And I said, "Well, I guess the way everybody learns to read, people show you and then you just catch on somehow. You just keep trying till you can do it." But what she was really saying to me is that as far as I'm concerned, you can't read and you can't write and you can't get a dissertation because, like Frederick Douglass, you're Black. You're a real American. And just like they burned down Frederick Douglass's news printing company, you're in the fire, honey. You're not getting out of here because I don't even think you can read, is my official answer. And then Elizabeth just got sick. We heard rumors that her husband was beating her. She looked like she was strung out on drugs. When you'd see her, she'd just be sort of crumpled up. And they said that she was getting therapy and she was on leave. So Maria Tomashko was like a little aggressive person. And she was always talking about having high standards and integrity. So I said, "Hey, listen, Elizabeth's kind of out of the game. Will you be my advisor?" And she said, "Sure." I said, "Okay, well, can we make a contract?" She said, "Yeah, cool." I say, "Okay, this is what I want. I got to write my dissertation and I can write a chapter a week just like that. Can you read a chapter a week?" She said, "Yeah, I can do that." And then she ignored me. I submitted my first chapter 3 months later. She says, "I haven't read it for grammar and spelling yet," which was an insult. Well, if 3 months went by and she hadn't read the first chapter, and I'm saying, "Well, the other professors, they didn't read either." And she said, "Silver Rain, you're probably going to have to go to their homes to ask them." And that's where I lost it. I really cussed Maria out. Because I knew she was pulling my chain, because I had driven to some of those professors' houses to deliver the first chapter, and they live way out in the boondocks by themselves, far away. That's how they were living. And I was supposed to drive around on a graduate student's income to all the places that I would have to go to get the papers to these people. The battery on my thing is dying. Look at these shadows on my face. I'm so sick. I'm going to have to get off now. But you can see I've been ignored to death. It's not right. Help me.